Waitress bullies a man, doesn't know who he is. The restaurant is bustling with high-end patrons, seated under dim, luxurious lighting that casts a warm glow across the grand chandeliers and polished marble floors. Waiters dressed in crisp black and white uniforms glide between tables with practiced ease, serving delicacies with an air of sophistication. The atmosphere is elegant, exclusive, and steeped in quiet wealth, a place for the elite. Tables are adorned with delicate white linens, silverware gleams under the soft light, and hushed voices mingle with the clinking of glasses, creating a refined yet lively hum. Every corner of the restaurant speaks of opulence: polished wood panels, tasteful artwork on the walls, and fresh flowers arranged meticulously on each table. The door swings open, and a man steps inside. Unlike the other patrons, he wears a simple jacket and well-worn shoes, his attire humble and markedly out of place here. There's a quietness about him, a modest demeanor that doesn't seem to fit the affluent surroundings. His gaze is calm as he takes in the room, perhaps a bit hesitant, as though he realizes he stands out but has chosen to step in anyway. He doesn't look like the typical customer this restaurant serves. He's not draped in designer clothing or adorned with expensive accessories. Instead, he exudes a quiet confidence, one that comes from within rather than from external trappings. As he stands there, surveying the room, his presence is understated but somehow compelling. A waitress notices him from across the room, her eyes narrowing slightly as she takes in his appearance. She walks over, her expression cool and her posture stiff. Her glance travels from his shoes up to his jacket, clearly appraising, or rather, judging him. There's a hint of disdain in her gaze as she approaches, and though she maintains a professional smile, there's a noticeable edge to her tone when she finally speaks. "Good evening, sir. May I help you?" Her voice is polite, but only just, with an underlying hint of condescension that implies she doesn't think he belongs here. Her words are coated with just enough disdain to let him know he's not exactly welcome. The man nods politely, his demeanor calm. "Yes, I'd like a table, please," he replies, his voice soft but respectful. He meets her gaze without flinching, but there's no hint of arrogance in his tone, only a quiet, steadfast politeness. The waitress raises an eyebrow, clearly taken aback. Her eyes flicker to the empty tables around the room, and for a brief moment, she considers telling him they're all reserved. But there's something in his calm, unwavering gaze that makes her hesitate. Reluctantly, she gestures to an empty table near the back of the room, away from the other patrons. "Right this way," she says, her tone clipped. As she leads him through the restaurant, she keeps glancing back, almost as if expecting him to change his mind and leave. She seats him at the table, placing the menu in front of him with a little more force than necessary. "Our specials are on the first page," she says, adding with a slight smirk, "but they're quite pricey." The man nods and thanks her, seemingly unbothered by her attitude. He opens the menu, scanning the options with genuine interest, though his modest appearance makes it clear that some of the restaurant's high-end prices might be a stretch for him. The waitress watches him for a moment, waiting for him to balk at the prices or to realize he's out of his depth. When he doesn't react, she purses her lips and walks away, shaking her head slightly as she mutters to herself. As he sits there, other patrons take notice of him. A couple at a nearby table exchange looks, whispering behind their hands and glancing over at him with raised eyebrows. One of them chuckles softly, and another guest at a table across the room glances at him with thinly veiled amusement. It's clear that his presence is causing a minor stir among the well-heeled diners, though he remains oblivious, calmly perusing the menu with a quiet sense of purpose. The waitress returns, her expression sour as she stands by his table, notepad in hand. "Have you decided?" she asks, her voice laced with impatience. He looks up at her and nods, pointing to an item on the menu. "I'll have the special, please," he says politely. She raises an eyebrow, visibly skeptical. "The special? Are you sure?" There's a hint of sarcasm in her tone, as though she doubts he can afford it. The man doesn't waver. He simply nods again, repeating, "Yes, the special, please." The waitress stares at him for a moment, then sighs, scribbling down the order with a dramatic flourish. "All right then," she says, her tone dripping with incredulity. She leaves, shaking her head, and mutters under her breath, "Can't say I didn't warn you." As she walks away, the man remains seated, seemingly undisturbed by her behavior. He folds his hands on the table, waiting patiently as the other patrons continue to cast glances his way. The tension in the air is palpable. It's as though everyone is waiting for him to make some kind of misstep to prove that he doesn't belong. Yet he sits there, unflinching, his expression calm and composed. Meanwhile, the whispers among the guests grow louder, a few of them even chuckling openly as they discuss his apparent audacity. "Can you believe he ordered the special?" one man says to his companion, a smirk on his face. "That dish costs more than he probably makes in a week." His companion laughs, and the waitress overhears, smirking to herself as she heads to the kitchen with the order. As the minutes pass, the waitress continues to glance over at him, her expression growing more annoyed with each glance. She seems irritated that he hasn't given up, that he's still sitting there, waiting as though he belongs. Finally, she returns with his drink, setting it down with a slight sneer. "Here you go," she says, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "It's imported. Expensive, too." She watches him, expecting a reaction, perhaps a look of discomfort or embarrassment. But instead, he simply thanks her, taking a small sip with a grateful smile. The waitress rolls her eyes, frustrated by his calm demeanor. She's about to turn and walk away when a group of customers at a nearby table calls her over, laughing and joking as they discuss the man. One of them asks, "Who let him in here?" prompting a round of snickers from the others. The waitress joins in, smirking as she glances back at the man, who remains unaware of the whispers and laughter directed at him. Several more minutes pass, and the man sits there quietly, sipping his drink and waiting for his meal. The waitress makes a point of ignoring him, letting his order take longer than usual in an attempt to subtly discourage him. But he remains patient, showing no sign of irritation or frustration, simply sitting there with an air of quiet dignity. Finally, the restaurant's owner arrives. He's a well-dressed, charismatic man who moves with authority, greeting patrons and shaking hands as he makes his way through the dining area. As he glances around the room, his eyes fall on the man at the back table, and his expression shifts immediately. His face lights up with recognition, and without a moment's hesitation, he heads straight for the man, a warm smile spreading across his face. The waitress, noticing the owner approaching, smirks to herself, thinking that he's about to handle the problem customer. She watches with a satisfied expression as the owner approaches the man's table, expecting him to politely ask the man to leave. Instead, she's stunned to see the owner extend his hand with genuine warmth, greeting the man as though they're old friends. The owner's voice carries across the room as he speaks, his tone filled with respect. "It's an honor to have you here, sir," he says, shaking the man's hand firmly. "Thank you for coming in today." The entire restaurant falls silent as the owner's words sink in, and the patrons turn to watch in shock. The waitress's jaw drops, her face going pale as she realizes her mistake. The man she'd assumed was beneath her, the man she'd treated with such disrespect, is clearly someone of great importance. The owner introduces him to a few of the nearby patrons, explaining that he's not just any guest, he's a highly respected figure, perhaps even a co-owner or a well-known philanthropist whose generosity has impacted countless lives. The patrons stare in astonishment, the weight of their judgment sinking in as they realize they'd misjudged him based solely on his appearance. The waitress stammers, her voice barely a whisper as she tries to apologize, her face flushed with embarrassment. But the man simply gives her a calm, understanding look, as though he's seen this reaction many times before. He doesn't seem angry or vindictive. Instead, there's a quiet wisdom in his eyes, a gentle reminder that true value isn't determined by outward appearances. With a calm, steady voice, he addresses the waitress, sharing a few words that resonate deeply. He speaks about the importance of kindness, about how every person deserves respect, regardless of how they look or dress. His words are simple, yet they carry a profound message that echoes through the room, leaving everyone in thoughtful silence. The owner gives the waitress a meaningful look, quietly instructing her to join him in his office for a conversation, indicating that there will be consequences for her behavior. She nods, her face burning with shame as she follows him, understanding the impact of her actions. As the man prepares to leave, he glances around the room, his gaze meeting the eyes of several patrons who had laughed at him earlier. They look away, uncomfortable, each of them affected by his words and the quiet dignity he exudes. The air in the restaurant has shifted, the laughter and judgment have been replaced by a sense of humility and reflection. Before he leaves, he offers a final reminder to those still watching. Remember, true worth isn't measured by what's on the outside. He nods politely to the owner, who thanks him once more, and then, with a calm smile, he exits the restaurant, leaving everyone in silent contemplation. The main character steps into the restaurant with a humble, almost reserved presence, clearly aware of his surroundings yet not intimidated by them. He takes a moment to glance around, his eyes absorbing the elegant details of the room, the finely dressed patrons, and the refined atmosphere that fills the air. Despite his modest attire, a simple jacket and neatly pressed but unremarkable pants, he holds himself with a calm assurance, as though he's comfortable in his own skin but well aware he stands out here. There's a subtle but noticeable hint of nervousness in the way he tucks his hands into his pockets briefly, then quickly pulls them out, almost as though reminding himself to keep his composure. As he makes his way toward the hostess stand, his pace is unhurried, even though his gaze occasionally drops to the floor as he passes other tables. His demeanor is soft-spoken and gentle, suggesting someone who doesn't demand attention but commands a quiet respect nonetheless. He doesn't rush or hesitate but approaches the hostess with a polite smile, waiting patiently for her to notice him. Other guests are absorbed in their conversations, and no one seems to acknowledge his entrance, a fact that seems to suit him just fine. When the hostess finally turns to him, he gives her a small nod of greeting. "Good evening," he says in a low, calm voice. "I'd like a table, please." The hostess gives him a quick once-over, her professional smile slipping just slightly as she takes in his attire. Yet the man stands steady, meeting her gaze without a hint of resentment or discomfort. His smile remains friendly and polite, even as he patiently endures her silent judgment. His hands are relaxed at his sides, his posture comfortable, conveying the message that he belongs here, despite appearances. There's a subtle strength in his calm demeanor, a quiet self-assurance that hints at an inner depth, perhaps even a hidden story he carries with him. He doesn't explain himself or offer any reason for being here. He simply waits for the hostess to lead him to his table, standing quietly, allowing the room's understated elegance to flow around him without needing to be part of it. To anyone paying close attention, there's an undeniable dignity in the way he holds himself, a strength that lies just beneath the surface, waiting to be revealed. The waitress spots the main character as he stands near the hostess stand, his modest attire drawing her immediate attention. She raises an eyebrow, her eyes narrowing slightly as she takes in his appearance from head to toe. Dressed in plain, well-worn clothes that stand out among the fashionable, high-end outfits of the other patrons, he appears completely out of place in this luxurious setting. Her expression shifts subtly, a faint smirk tugging at the corners of her mouth as if she's already made up her mind about him. With an air of quiet impatience, she approaches him, her posture stiff and her gaze unwelcoming. As she gets closer, she barely conceals her disdain, her eyes flickering over his jacket, his shoes, his overall look, each glance carrying a silent judgment. It's clear she doesn't expect him to be a typical guest here and seems almost annoyed at his audacity to walk into such a high-end establishment. Despite maintaining a professional smile, there's an unmistakable edge in her tone as she finally speaks. "Good evening, sir," she says, forcing a polite but insincere smile. Are you looking for a table?" Her voice is courteous, but just barely, carrying an undertone of condescension as though she's certain he doesn't belong. The man nods politely, meeting her gaze without a trace of resentment. He replies calmly, "Yes, please." Reluctantly, she gestures toward a small table near the back, away from the other diners, as if to subtly distance him from the real guests. She hesitates for a moment, clearly doubting his decision but finally leading him toward the table, her face a mix of skepticism and barely concealed irritation. As he follows, she rolls her eyes subtly, convinced she's wasting her time. As the main character settles into his seat, he takes a moment to look around the restaurant, seeming to enjoy the elegance of his surroundings despite the subtle disdain directed his way. The waitress stands nearby, watching him with a look of barely concealed irritation, her arms crossed as she waits impatiently for him to make a choice. When she sees him gazing around, she clears her throat sharply, drawing his attention back to her. She's clearly growing restless, and her expression shifts from polite professionalism to one of open condescension. "Are you sure you're comfortable here?" she asks, forcing a tight smile that doesn't reach her eyes. "We cater to a certain kind of client here. You know, people with refined tastes?" Her words are laced with sarcasm, as though she's subtly questioning his decision to dine in a place so far beyond what she assumes is his usual range. The man, still calm and unfazed, simply nods politely, looking at her with gentle eyes. "Yes, I understand," he says softly. "I just wanted to treat myself." The waitress purses her lips, barely holding back a scoff. She doesn't try to hide her disapproval and quickly glances over her shoulder, as if looking to see if any of the other waitstaff have noticed this out-of-place customer. When she turns back to him, her tone is sharper. "Well," she says, picking up the menu and flipping it open with a flourish, "we have quite a selection," but she pauses dramatically, letting her eyes linger on him for effect. "Some of our dishes are quite pricey." Her gaze drops meaningfully to his simple attire, her implication clear: she doesn't think he can afford it. The man simply nods again, showing no reaction to her insinuation. He asks politely, "Could you tell me about the specials, please?" She rolls her eyes, sighing as if he's made a ridiculous request. "The specials?" "Sure." Her voice drips with exaggerated enthusiasm, and she begins listing the dishes with a tone that implies she doubts he'd understand or appreciate any of them. She rattles off the ingredients of an expensive seafood dish, describing it with the kind of excessive detail reserved for clientele she respects. When he nods thoughtfully, taking in her description with genuine interest, she seems almost frustrated by his lack of discomfort. She quickly interrupts him before he can ask more questions. "Are you sure you're aware of the prices?" she says, a smirk tugging at the corners of her mouth. "We don't usually have first-timers here who order this sort of thing." The man meets her gaze calmly, replying with a simple, "Yes, I'd like to try it." Taken aback, she narrows her eyes, unable to believe he's serious. She decides to push further, hoping to discourage him. "Well, in that case, if you're sure you can handle it," she says, drawing out the words as though speaking to a child. "Just letting you know it's a specialty dish. Our regulars love it, but it's not for everyone. You have to have a certain palate to appreciate it." Her words are drenched in sarcasm, a not-so-subtle jab at what she assumes is his lack of sophistication. The man merely smiles, unbothered by her attitude. "I think I'll enjoy it," he says, his voice steady. Irritated by his calm response, she lets out a small, exasperated sigh. She quickly jots down his order, her handwriting becoming messier as her annoyance builds. She mutters something under her breath, just barely audible, a mocking comment about people punching above their weight. When he doesn't react, she clears her throat again, this time with obvious impatience. "Well, just don't be surprised if it's a little too complex for your tastes," she says, her tone dismissive as she snaps her notepad shut. She gives him one last appraising look, her gaze cold, as if silently judging him one final time before walking away. As she walks back toward the kitchen, she mutters to herself, shaking her head in disbelief. "Some people really don't know their place," she whispers, her voice thick with disdain. She's clearly irritated, feeling as though this customer has wasted her time and disrupted the exclusivity of her precious restaurant. Her mind races with sarcastic thoughts about him, convinced he's nothing more than an outsider who doesn't belong here. The main character sits calmly, unflinching in the face of the waitress's thinly veiled hostility. Each time she makes a condescending comment or questions his choice, he responds with unfailing politeness, offering a soft, "Thank you," or a quiet nod. His face remains relaxed, his demeanor unshaken by her rudeness, as if he's either oblivious to her attitude or simply choosing not to let it bother him. When she emphasizes the pricey nature of the dishes, he just smiles slightly and listens attentively, treating her words with genuine interest instead of taking offense. Even as she makes her mocking remarks about first-timers and dishes being too complex, he maintains his calm, replying with a gentle, I think I'd like to try it, thank you. There's a hint of warmth in his tone that seems genuine, almost disarming, as though he's choosing to see the best in her despite her obvious contempt. This quiet resilience only seems to irritate her more. Every polite response he gives feels like a quiet challenge to her judgment, his steady gaze and composed manner contrasting sharply with her impatience. She almost looks uncomfortable under his calm, undisturbed gaze, as if realizing that he's not going to react the way she expected. As he thanks her yet again, her frustration is palpable. She shifts awkwardly, finally snapping her notepad shut with a bit more force than necessary, her irritation evident. Despite her growing annoyance, he remains composed, meeting her hostile gaze with an expression of gratitude and respect that seems both sincere and unwavering, leaving her with nothing to fuel her judgment but her own assumptions. Have you ever been judged unfairly based on your appearance or background? How did it make you feel? Tell us your story in the comments below. This moment encourages the audience to connect personally with the main character's experience, drawing them into the storyline on an emotional level. The prompt gently nudges viewers to think about times they may have felt out of place, underestimated, or unfairly judged, creating a shared space of empathy and understanding. As they watch the calm, composed main character face the waitress's disdain, viewers are encouraged to reflect on their own experiences and share them in the comments. This not only increases engagement but also fosters a sense of community among viewers, allowing them to voice their feelings and offer support to others who have been in similar situations. It's a powerful reminder that, like the main character, staying true to oneself in the face of judgment can be both humbling and empowering. The atmosphere in the restaurant grows even more uncomfortable as the waitress begins to escalate her behavior. Once she's taken the main character's order, she leaves him to sit at his table alone, but her judgment doesn't stop there. She watches him from across the room, her eyes frequently darting in his direction, silently assessing whether he belongs in her world. Each time she looks over, there's a flicker of disdain in her gaze, and the tension starts to rise as she gears up to take her treatment of him to the next level. When she returns with his drink, her tone is noticeably sharper, though she still hides it behind a forced smile. As she places the glass down with a little too much force, she comments, "This is a nice drink, if you can handle it." The words are casual, but there's an unmistakable bite to her delivery, as if she's making a pointed judgment about his ability to enjoy the upscale experience she thinks he's unworthy of. Sensing an opportunity to further assert her perceived superiority, she leans in slightly and speaks with an exaggerated sweetness. "Perhaps you'd prefer something a little more affordable?" she suggests, her voice dripping with sarcasm. She rattles off a few cheaper items on the menu, ones that stand out for their simplicity and lack of sophistication, clearly trying to embarrass him in front of the other diners. "You know, we have a great burger for a fraction of the price of the fish." It's a real crowd pleaser, she adds, making sure to glance around as though looking for confirmation from the other patrons that this suggestion is the best he could hope for. Her voice rings out just a little too loudly, ensuring that other diners catch the implication. A few heads turn, and murmurs ripple through the restaurant as some patrons glance over, their eyes flickering to the main character and back to the waitress. He can feel their gaze, the silent judgment building, and his discomfort begins to mount. Yet, he doesn't respond to her provocation, continuing to remain calm, his eyes steady as he quietly thanks her and politely declines the offer. She smirks, clearly enjoying the power dynamic she's created, and walks away, only to return a few moments later to check on him. This time, her comments are even more pointed. "Everything okay with your meal?" she asks loudly, her eyes scanning him with feigned concern. "You're not having trouble eating, are you? I'd hate for the flavors to be too advanced for your taste," she says, her words layered with a cruel undertone. She pauses as if waiting for him to react, to show that he's embarrassed or overwhelmed, but he remains quiet and composed, his polite demeanor never wavering. Her frustration begins to grow, and she starts making her remarks more audibly, ensuring that anyone nearby can overhear. "I swear, some people just don't know their place," she mutters, though loud enough for a nearby table to hear. A woman at a nearby booth glances at the main character with a look of sympathy, but the man only gives her a small, nonchalant smile before looking away. The waitress takes this as a challenge, and in an attempt to break his resolve, she leans in closer this time, her voice dripping with faux sweetness. "I hope you're not feeling uncomfortable, sir. I know our clientele can be a bit discerning. Don't want you to feel like you're out of your depth. If you need anything simpler, we can always get you the kids' menu." She chuckles, though it's a bitter sound that grates on anyone who might be listening. The other patron's eyes flicker toward the exchange, and the air grows thicker with tension. One of the diners at a nearby table shoots the man an apologetic glance, but says nothing, uncomfortable with the situation unfolding before them. The main character, however, remains composed, his face an unreadable mask. He simply smiles politely. "I'm fine, thank you," his voice calm and steady, a direct contrast to her thinly veiled insults. Her frustration is palpable now, and she decides to push the limits even further, perhaps hoping to provoke him into a reaction. She moves toward the nearby kitchen, but not before making sure to loudly announce, "I think we need to have a talk about what's appropriate for someone in your situation to order." Her words hang in the air, harsh and judgmental, but the main character does nothing to engage with them. He stays seated, quietly reflecting, while the other diners begin to shift in their seats, unsure of how to respond to the escalating tension. The waitress is now openly ridiculing him in front of the other patrons, as though she's sure he doesn't belong in this world of privilege and sophistication. Her remarks grow bolder, almost daring him to react, but still he remains composed. The silence that follows her last comment feels heavy, laden with the judgment she's flung his way. She watches him, waiting for him to speak or fidget, anything that will confirm her beliefs about him, but he remains unmoved, a quiet presence in the middle of her growing storm. His dignified silence only serves to frustrate her further, the weight of her own assumptions and prejudice settling heavily on her shoulders. And as she walks away, her frustration mingling with the quiet discomfort of the onlookers, the tension in the restaurant lingers in the air, thick and palpable, drawing every eye to the man who refuses to be broken by her cruelty. As the waitress's behavior escalates, a few of the other diners start to notice the interaction between her and the main character. At first, the murmurs are quiet, as most are too uncomfortable to speak up, unsure of how to react. But as the tension builds, so do the reactions from the bystanders, each one revealing a different layer of judgment and discomfort in the air. A couple seated at a nearby table, a well-dressed man and woman, exchange looks as the waitress continues her sarcastic remarks. The woman, mid-conversation with her companion, momentarily looks over at the scene, and her lips twitch into a slight smile. She leans in to whisper something to her partner, both of them glancing toward the main character with a mix of curiosity and amusement. The man chuckles quietly, the sound barely audible but enough to be heard by a few nearby tables. His soft laughter doesn't carry the same sharp cruelty as the waitress's words, but it's clear that he's finding some entertainment in the exchange. The woman, in turn, shakes her head as if to say, "This doesn't surprise me." She barely stifles a quiet giggle as the waitress hovers over the man, treating him as if he's an outcast in a place where he doesn't belong. The couple exchanges knowing glances, seemingly reinforcing the waitress's subtle belief that the main character is a fish out of water. A few other patrons shift in their seats uncomfortably, their eyes flickering between the main character and the waitress. Some glance at each other, seemingly unsure whether to intervene or keep their heads down, afraid of getting involved. One older woman, sitting at a table with a glass of wine, eyes the situation with a look of pity but says nothing. She sips her drink, her gaze lingering for a moment longer on the main character, perhaps feeling sympathy for him, but her silence speaks volumes. In a way, she seems complicit, witnessing the humiliation but choosing to turn away, as though not wanting to disrupt the established order. Across the room, a younger man in a sleek suit watches the interaction unfold with barely contained disbelief. He taps his fingers against the table, clearly unsettled by the waitress's behavior, but he says nothing. His expression shifts from confusion to mild discomfort as the waitress's loud comments carry over to his table. He tries to focus on his phone, hoping to escape the awkward tension of the room, but he can't seem to look away from the growing situation. Still, he says nothing, clearly unsure of how to step in or whether it's his place. His hesitance only serves to reinforce the idea that the main character is indeed an outsider, the kind of person who doesn't belong in such an exclusive space. In the corner, a young woman, likely in her early 20s, watches the scene unfold with an expression of deep unease. She glances at the main character, her eyes full of sympathy, but quickly looks away when their gazes meet. She doesn't want to make him feel more uncomfortable, but she's clearly disturbed by the waitress's attitude. Her discomfort grows as the waitress's voice rings louder, her judgment obvious to everyone in the room. The woman awkwardly shifts in her seat, casting a quick glance at the older man sitting next to her, a father or perhaps a family member. He catches her look and sighs softly, shaking his head with a resigned expression. He, too, sees the unfolding drama, but like many others, he chooses not to intervene. A man sitting alone at a table near the window watches the interaction with barely concealed disdain. His brow furrows, his lips tightening as he watches the waitress's cruelty unfold. He's clearly uncomfortable with how the situation is developing, and his expression hardens into one of disapproval. His gaze flickers to the main character, as though searching for a sign of protest or indignation, but when none comes, he shifts uncomfortably in his seat, suddenly wishing he could say something but unsure of how to do so without making things worse. Despite the growing discomfort around him, the main character remains calm and unaffected, though it's clear that the collective reactions from the bystanders are starting to build. The waitress, now emboldened by the quiet approval she seems to be receiving, continues to escalate her behavior, but the mixed reactions from the diners add an additional layer of tension to the scene. While some enjoy the spectacle, others squirm in their seats, caught between a desire to speak out and a fear of causing further disruption. This silent endorsement of the waitress's actions only reinforces the main character's sense of isolation in the room, but it also highlights the subtle ways in which social pressures work to keep people in their designated places, even in the most refined of settings. Despite the waitress's ongoing barrage of condescending remarks, the main character remains unwavering in his composure. He listens attentively to her snide comments, but there's not a flicker of irritation or frustration in his eyes. He doesn't allow her judgment to sway him, nor does he show any signs of being shaken by her attempt to make him feel out of place. Instead, he calmly picks up the menu, as if assessing his options just like any other patron. The waitress hovers nearby, watching him with a faint smirk on her face, anticipating that he will opt for something cheap and easy, just as she expects. The air is thick with tension, her eyes narrowed as she waits for him to make his move, already mentally preparing herself to mock whatever choice he makes. The main character finally looks up at her, his calm gaze unwavering. "I'd like the lobster bisque, please," he says, his voice steady yet soft. The dish, expensive and sophisticated, stands in stark contrast to the simpler options she had suggested earlier. The waitress's eyebrows shoot up in disbelief. She's caught off guard by the order, clearly not expecting him to choose something so refined. Her eyes dart between him and the menu, as if checking for some mistake or miscommunication. Her fingers twitch slightly, but she quickly regains her composure. "You're sure about that?" she asks, her voice tinged with disbelief. She's still trying to maintain her superiority, though it's clear that she's taken aback by his choice. Her tone is now laced with a faint trace of confusion, as though she can't reconcile this humble, modest man with the idea that he would choose such an expensive dish. The main character simply nods, his expression calm and unfazed. "Yes, thank you," he responds quietly, not offering any further explanation or justification. For a brief moment, the waitress stands there, speechless, clearly uncomfortable with the way her assumptions have been disrupted. She blinks a few times, staring at him with a mix of confusion and disbelief, trying to process what just happened. But rather than reacting to her surprise or embarrassment, the main character merely gives her a polite smile, waiting for her to leave. He's made his choice and, despite everything, refuses to allow her rudeness to dictate his actions. His quiet confidence, coupled with his refusal to be intimidated by her, highlights his resilience and determination to stay true to himself in the face of her judgment. The interaction leaves a brief but palpable silence in the air, a quiet defiance against the unfair treatment he's endured. What would you do if you were treated unfairly like this? Would you stand your ground, or would you react differently? Share your experiences with us in the comments below. The tension in the restaurant reaches a boiling point when the door swings open, and the sound of footsteps interrupts the uncomfortable silence. The atmosphere shifts instantly as the restaurant owner, a well-dressed, charismatic man in his mid-40s, strides through the entrance. His presence commands attention, and the room quiets as everyone turns to see who has entered. He scans the room for a moment, his gaze moving swiftly across the patrons, but as soon as his eyes land on the main character, his expression changes to a look of instant recognition crosses his face, and his previously composed demeanor shifts into one of uncontainable excitement. The owner's eyes widen, and a broad smile spreads across his face as he makes a beeline for the main character, his steps quick and purposeful. "Mr. Carter," the owner exclaims, his voice filled with enthusiasm and warmth. "I didn't realize you were dining with us today. It's an honor." He practically rushes over to the table, his hand already extending for a handshake, his face glowing with genuine respect and admiration. The owner's demeanor is completely different from that of the waitress, kind, deferential, and clearly in awe of the man seated before him. The waitress, standing nearby with a tray in her hand, freezes mid-step. Her eyes flicker from the owner to the main character, then back again, her confusion mounting. She stares at the scene unfolding before her, unable to reconcile the man she's been so dismissive toward with the reaction of the owner, someone she knows holds a lot of influence in the restaurant world. The realization dawns on her too late. The man she's been treating so poorly is not just another customer. He's someone far more important. Other patrons in the restaurant begin to whisper among themselves, glancing between the owner and the main character. The whispers grow louder as the owner continues to greet the man with utmost reverence. "It's been far too long," the owner says warmly, his voice full of respect. "We've missed you around here. I can't tell you how grateful we are for your continued support of the restaurant." As the owner enthusiastically chats with the main character, the atmosphere in the restaurant shifts dramatically. The air of superiority that once hung over the place dissipates, replaced by a new sense of awe. The patrons who had been watching the interaction with quiet judgment now exchange looks of surprise and realization. The main character is not just any ordinary diner, he's someone who commands respect in ways the waitress could never have imagined. The waitress, still standing frozen by the table, is visibly uncomfortable. Her face pales, and her gaze flickers nervously between the owner and the man she had ridiculed just moments before. The awkwardness of the situation is almost palpable as she realizes the full extent of her error. She stands there, unsure of how to act, her earlier smugness replaced by a sudden sense of vulnerability. Meanwhile, the owner, still greeting the main character with effusive warmth, completely ignores the waitress, signaling just how little her opinion matters in this moment. The contrast between his treatment of the main character and her earlier behavior is stark, highlighting the deep divide between respect and dismissal. It's a moment that not only shocks the waitress but forces the entire room to reassess their perceptions of who truly belongs in such a place. As the owner continues to chat with the main character, his words become even more revealing, adding layers to the growing tension in the room. With a wide, genuine grin on his face, the owner turns toward the other patrons, still hovering around the table, and announces in a clear, confident voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure you've all heard of Mr. Ethan Carter, the co-owner of this very restaurant." The words hang in the air like a heavy cloud, and for a split second, the entire room goes silent. The patrons, who had been busy exchanging glances and whispers, fall into a stunned hush. The realization crashes over them, and a ripple of disbelief spreads through the restaurant. The humble, seemingly unassuming man they had all watched so skeptically is no ordinary customer. He is the co-owner of the establishment, a figure whose name many in the room have certainly heard, but whose face they did not expect to see sitting at a table like any other guest. Ethan's eyes meet the owner's, and for a moment, there's a brief flash of acknowledgement, not of superiority, but of quiet understanding. The owner, clearly proud to make the introduction, continues, his voice warm and full of reverence. And of course, Ethan is not just a business partner here. He's also a major philanthropist. He's funded numerous projects in the city, and his contributions to local charities have made a tremendous difference. In fact, I can't tell you how much his generosity has shaped the restaurant's success, from the beginning until now. The patrons' faces shift from confusion to stunned realization. Some lower their eyes in embarrassment, others stare at him in awe, as they process the shock of the revelation. A couple of people exchange furtive looks, as if questioning how they could have possibly misjudged him. There's a visible change in the room's energy. The air feels charged with disbelief, with those who had been laughing or whispering moments ago now feeling like they've been caught in a moment of grave misjudgment. The waitress, still standing frozen at the table, looks like she's been struck speechless. Her hand, which had been holding the tray, is now limp at her side. Her face flushes with a mixture of guilt and disbelief, her earlier smugness replaced by an overwhelming wave of realization. Her eyes dart nervously around the room, trying to find some way to escape the unbearable tension. She opens her mouth to say something, but no words come out. The weight of the situation presses down on her, and she stands motionless, trapped by her own actions. "I didn't know," she stammers finally, barely above a whisper. Her voice shakes, and her eyes flicker nervously toward the main character. The apology, however, feels empty in the face of her earlier rudeness. It's clear that the realization comes too late. Ethan, for his part, is calm and composed. There's no hint of anger or resentment in his expression. He simply nods, his demeanor as humble and polite as it was when he first arrived. "There's no need to apologize," he says, his voice steady and nonchalant. "We all make assumptions sometimes." But even as he speaks, his words hang heavily in the room, cutting through the awkward silence with the sharpness of truth. His calm response stands in stark contrast to the turmoil the others feel as they come to terms with their assumptions. The patrons' reactions vary. Some look at the waitress with quiet judgment, while others try to hide their embarrassment. One woman at a nearby table, who had been watching the interaction with an amused smile earlier, now shifts uncomfortably in her seat. The man sitting next to her, who had been chuckling at the situation earlier, looks down at his lap, unable to meet Ethan's gaze. The realization that they had been complicit in the judgment weighs heavily on them. But the most striking reaction is from the waitress herself. Her face, once flushed with confidence and arrogance, is now pale, the color drained from her cheeks. The shift in power dynamics is palpable, and she's left standing there, a mere bystander to the revelation that has turned the entire room upside down. The owner, still standing by Ethan's side, smiles politely at the crowd, letting the impact of the revelation settle in. "I'm sure Mr. Carter would prefer a quieter, more personal dinner tonight," he says, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "But before we let him enjoy his meal, let's all take a moment to recognize that no matter who we are, we should never judge others based on appearances." The words echo in the room, a powerful reminder of the lesson that has just unfolded before everyone's eyes. The shift in atmosphere is palpable. The respect that had been absent moments ago now fills the air. Patrons sit up straighter, some even offering polite nods or acknowledging Ethan with newfound reverence. The room, once filled with judgment and condescension, is now infused with a sense of humility and reflection. As the realization of his true identity sinks in, the main character is no longer just a customer. He is a symbol of resilience, humility, and the power of staying true to oneself, regardless of how others may perceive or treat you. The moment the revelation settles in, the waitress's entire demeanor crumbles. Her once confident, dismissive expression turns pale, and her eyes widen in shock as she realizes the gravity of her mistake. The color drains from her face, and she stands motionless, her body stiff with fear. The warmth that once defined her attitude is gone, replaced by a cold, sinking feeling in the pit of her stomach. She opens her mouth to speak, but no words come out at first. Her lips tremble slightly as she looks at Ethan, then quickly shifts her gaze to the owner, then back to the rest of the room. Her breath quickens, a wave of panic sweeping over her as she comprehends the magnitude of what she's done. The entire restaurant is watching, the eyes of her colleagues, the patrons, and the owner all focused on her in silent judgment. "But I'm so sorry," she stammers, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't know. I didn't know who you were." Her words come out in an awkward jumble, each attempt to apologize more disjointed than the last. Her hands fumble nervously with the tray she's holding, but she's no longer concerned about her task. Her mind is racing, filled with regret and embarrassment, and she can barely meet anyone's gaze, least of all Ethan's. The silence in the room deepens as she falters, clearly struggling with the weight of her actions. The owner, still standing beside Ethan, watches her with a mixture of disappointment and patience, though his gaze is cold. The patron's eyes are heavy with judgment, some shaking their heads, others looking away in discomfort. Ethan remains calm and composed, but the pain of the moment is evident in his eyes. He doesn't respond immediately, allowing the weight of the apology to sink in, and the quiet tension builds as the waitress stands there, completely undone by the gravity of her mistake. As the room remains heavy with the weight of the revelation, Ethan slowly shifts his focus back to the waitress, who is still standing, her hands shaking and her face flushed with embarrassment. He takes a deep breath, his calm demeanor unwavering despite the tension that fills the air. The owner, sensing the moment of introspection, steps back slightly, giving Ethan the space to speak. Patrons, who had been exchanging nervous glances, grow quiet, eager to hear how the man they had misjudged would react. Ethan's voice breaks the silence. "It's okay," he begins gently, his tone warm but firm. "I understand why you might have made assumptions. We all do it from time to time, myself included." His words are measured, deliberately choosing kindness over anger, creating a contrast to the hostile judgment he faced earlier. The waitress's eyes flicker up at him, her gaze filled with a mix of relief and guilt. She doesn't know how to respond, caught between the instinct to apologize further and the realization that her actions can never be fully undone. "I know it can be easy to judge someone by how they look, by what they wear, or how they carry themselves," Ethan continues, his words carrying weight. "But appearances can be deceiving. I don't blame you for thinking I didn't belong here. It's a natural reaction, I suppose, when someone doesn't fit the image of what you expect." The main character pauses, letting his words settle before continuing. "But let me tell you something. I've had everything and I've had nothing. I've been in positions where I've had the power to make decisions that affected lives, and I've been in moments where I've had to rely on the kindness of others just to get by." He meets her gaze, his voice softening. "What I've learned is that money, status, or power are nothing compared to the value of kindness and humility. Those are the things that truly matter to me, and those are the things that have carried me through life, not wealth or recognition. People like you, who show respect and humility, are far more important than any title or paycheck could ever make someone." The waitress's eyes begin to well up with tears as she listens to him, the weight of her previous actions sinking in. She feels the sting of shame as she recalls the snide comments, the dismissive attitude, and the judgment she placed on someone who, in reality, she now sees as someone with far greater strength and integrity than she had imagined. "I hope you can understand," Ethan continues, his voice still steady but filled with a deep sense of compassion. "We all make mistakes. I've made plenty of them. But it's how we treat others in the face of those mistakes that defines us. That's what I care about." The waitress, now fighting back tears, nods slowly, her face contorting with a mix of regret and gratitude. I truly am sorry," she whispers, her voice trembling. "I didn't mean to. I didn't realize. I was just so wrong." Ethan smiles softly, his expression devoid of anger or malice. "I know you didn't," he replies kindly. "But the important thing now is that we learn from this. And I truly believe you will." The room is still, and for a moment, it feels as though the entire restaurant is holding its breath, waiting for what will happen next. The patrons, who had been watching with quiet judgment, now feel a deep sense of respect for Ethan. His response, filled with patience and understanding, shifts the entire atmosphere in the room. The waitress, still overcome with emotion, is left speechless for a moment. She glances around at the patrons, who are now looking at her not with disdain but with a newfound sense of empathy. Some of them nod, offering a silent gesture of support, acknowledging her mistake but also recognizing that she, too, is human and capable of growth. As the weight of the moment settles, the room slowly begins to relax, the tension evaporating as the focus shifts from the conflict to the lesson that has unfolded. Ethan has not only forgiven the waitress, but he has also shown everyone present what true power, the power of kindness, humility, and empathy, really looks like. His words continue to echo in the room as the waitress begins to regain her composure. Kindness over status, he had said. Humility over wealth. These words linger in the air, marking the moment as a turning point for everyone who witnessed it. For Ethan, it's not just about being respected for his wealth or position. It's about being recognized for his character, his ability to rise above judgment, and to treat others with the dignity they deserve, no matter who they are or where they come from. As Ethan's calm and composed words continue to resonate throughout the room, the atmosphere shifts from uncomfortable tension to reflective silence. The owner, who has been standing quietly to the side during this exchange, slowly steps forward. His expression is one of disappointment but also of careful control as he looks toward the waitress. Without a word, the owner gestures toward the back of the restaurant with a slight tilt of his head, motioning for her to follow him. His demeanor is stern yet measured, signaling that this is no ordinary conversation. He doesn't raise his voice, but the weight of his gaze and the direction he gives are more than enough to indicate the seriousness of the situation. The waitress, still reeling from the shock of Ethan's revelation and her own faltering apology, stands frozen for a moment. Her heart is racing, and she feels a sudden, intense wave of regret wash over her. She had already been humiliated in front of everyone, but now, the real consequences, the ones that would affect her job and her livelihood, were about to become clear. She glances briefly at Ethan, who, though not unkind, offers no comforting words. His silence only underscores the gravity of the situation. As she slowly walks toward the back of the restaurant, the eyes of the patrons follow her every move. There is a shift in their gaze now, no longer filled with judgment toward Ethan but toward the waitress. She feels their eyes on her like a heavy weight on her shoulders. She's aware that everyone has witnessed her downfall, and that knowledge is almost too much to bear. Once they reach the owner's office, he opens the door for her, ushering her inside. She enters hesitantly, almost as if she's walking toward her own doom. The owner follows her in, closing the door behind them with a soft click. The room is small and functional, decorated with only the essentials, but its simplicity makes it feel more like a place for tough conversations than a place of refuge. The owner takes a seat behind his desk, his eyes never leaving the waitress's face. His posture is authoritative, but there's no anger in his voice, only a quiet disappointment. "I've been in this business for a long time," he begins, his tone calm but firm. "And I've seen all sorts of people walk through these doors. Some are humble, some are arrogant. But every person who comes here deserves respect. They all have something of value, something unique to offer." He pauses, letting his words settle in. "Your behavior today was unacceptable. You judged someone without knowing who they were. Worse than that, you made them feel inferior. That's not who we are here at this restaurant." The waitress stands there, her hands folded tightly in front of her, trying to hold back the tears that threaten to spill. She nods, though she can barely speak, the weight of her own guilt nearly suffocating. The embarrassment of her actions is only compounded by the silence that fills the space between them. "I know you're sorry," the owner continues, his voice softer now but still filled with the gravity of the situation. "And I know you didn't mean for it to go this far. But the impact of your actions, it goes beyond today. It's not just about treating one person poorly. It's about the message you sent, not just to Ethan, but to everyone in this restaurant. It's about how we, as a team, are expected to treat our guests, all of them." Her face flushes a deep shade of red, not from the humiliation of her mistake but from the painful realization that her actions have reflected poorly not just on her, but on the entire establishment. The thought of potentially losing her job, of having her career at the restaurant end because of her careless attitude, weighs heavily on her heart. She had been so sure of herself, so confident that she could get away with looking down on someone she assumed didn't belong, but now, the full scope of her mistake is painfully clear. "You've been here long enough to know the standard we hold ourselves to," the owner continues, leaning forward slightly in his chair. "And I expect you to live up to that standard every day. You've lost that trust today, and it's something that will take time to rebuild. She nods again, her throat tight with emotion. She wants to apologize, to say something, but the words don't come. What could she possibly say? How could she undo what she had done? There was no way to take back the hurt she had caused, no way to erase the humiliation she had inflicted. "You'll stay on for now," the owner says finally, breaking the silence. "But this is your last chance. If you can prove to me that you're capable of better, that you can learn from this and show genuine remorse, then I'm willing to give you that opportunity. But understand this, if something like this happens again, you'll be gone. I won't hesitate to let you go." The weight of his words hangs in the air, and for the first time, the waitress realizes that she is standing at a crossroads. She can either grow from this moment, learn from it, and work to become a better person, or she can allow her pride and arrogance to continue dictating her actions, which will ultimately cost her everything. The owner stands, signaling that the conversation is over. "I hope you understand what's at stake here," he says softly. "I've given you a second chance. Don't waste it." With that, he walks to the door, opens it, and gestures for her to leave. She stands there for a moment, the weight of her actions pressing down on her. As she exits, the door closes behind her with a soft click, and she's left alone to reflect on the consequences of her behavior. As Ethan steps toward the exit, the entire restaurant feels the shift in the air. His calm demeanor remains, but his presence commands the room in a way that is impossible to ignore. The moments of tension and judgment have now been replaced with a quiet, thoughtful stillness as patrons watch him leave. Before he exits the door, he pauses. He doesn't turn to the owner, who is still in his office, or the waitress, who is standing off to the side, waiting for her next move. Instead, he takes a few steps back toward the center of the dining area, his voice calm but resonating with authority as he addresses everyone. "I want to leave you all with something," he begins, his tone gentle yet firm. "I walked in here today, and I wasn't treated with kindness, not at first. I was judged based on my appearance, based on what others assumed I was. And for a moment, it stung." He looks around the room, making eye contact with various patrons, letting his words settle in. "But you know what? It doesn't matter. I didn't let it define me. Because we all have the choice to rise above that judgment. We all have the ability to show kindness to others, no matter who they are, no matter what they wear, or where they come from. That's what truly matters." There's a pause, and Ethan's gaze softens, as if he's speaking directly to the waitress who had mistreated him earlier. We never know what someone is going through. We never know the challenges they face. So why add to their burden? Why contribute to their pain with disrespect or cruelty? He shakes his head, almost as if in disbelief at how easy it is for people to forget the power of compassion. "This isn't about money. It isn't about status," Ethan continues, his voice gaining strength with each word. "It's about humanity. We all deserve respect. And we should be offering that respect freely, to everyone, not just to those who fit our narrow expectations." He takes a step back toward the door, his final words hanging in the air. "So, the next time you're tempted to judge someone by their appearance, or by what you think they can or cannot afford, remember this moment. Treat them with the dignity they deserve. Because that's the right thing to do." With those words, Ethan opens the door, the sound of the hinges creaking sharply in the quiet room. The weight of his message is palpable, as if the room itself has been transformed. As he walks out into the street, the door shuts behind him, and a wave of silence lingers, giving everyone in that room a moment to reflect on what they've just heard. For the waitress, the owner, and even the patrons, the lesson is clear. The true measure of a person is not in what they have or how they appear, but in how they treat others. And that lesson is one that will linger long after Ethan has gone. As the door closes behind Ethan, the energy in the restaurant shifts once again. The once bustling atmosphere, filled with laughter and chatter, now feels subdued, almost reverent. Patrons who were once oblivious to the weight of the moment now find themselves in quiet reflection, feeling the sting of their own complicity in the events that unfolded. A few patrons glance toward each other, their faces flushed with embarrassment, as they start to process the significance of what just happened. Some exchange uncomfortable glances, murmuring soft apologies under their breath as if trying to make amends for their previous thoughts or actions. Others sit in stunned silence, contemplating the lesson they've just witnessed. A middle-aged man in a suit, who had been seated nearby and had overheard the conversation, shifts uncomfortably in his chair. He glances toward the waitress, his eyes filled with a quiet understanding. He had been one of the patrons who had chuckled at the initial exchange, assuming the man wasn't fitting in. Now, he feels a deep sense of shame. He looks around the table, his gaze meeting that of a young woman who had been visibly uncomfortable during the entire interaction. She meets his eyes, and without saying a word, they share a moment of silent recognition. They were both complicit in the judgment, in the assumption that Ethan didn't belong, and now, they both understand how wrong they were. Another woman, sitting alone at a corner table, watches the door close behind Ethan, her face thoughtful. She had been one of the bystanders who did nothing when the waitress made her cruel remarks. Now, she reflects on how easy it had been for her to simply observe without speaking up. The weight of her own silence is heavy, and she feels the need to act differently next time, to stand up for others when they are mistreated, even if it means stepping outside her comfort zone. As the minutes pass, murmurs of apology and regret continue to ripple through the room. Some patrons, still feeling uneasy, offer soft, awkward apologies to the waitress, acknowledging that they now see her in a different light. The waitress, still standing in the corner, looks overwhelmed by the change in atmosphere. She stands with her shoulders slightly slumped, her face pale with humiliation and regret. The owner, who has returned from his brief meeting with the waitress, steps out from the back office and glances around at the patrons. He observes the shift in behavior, noticing that many are reflecting on their actions, perhaps for the first time. The owner walks to the front of the restaurant and clears his throat. It's not easy to accept when we've been wrong. But I want to thank all of you for being open to learning from today's events. We all have room to grow, to be better, and I hope that this experience will inspire us to treat everyone who walks through these doors with the respect they deserve. His words are simple but sincere, and the room nods in silent agreement. The patrons remain quiet for a moment longer, each processing the lesson in their own way. There is no loud applause, no dramatic shift. Instead, there is a subtle, shared understanding that what they witnessed today was more than just an isolated incident. It was a powerful reminder of the importance of empathy, respect, and the recognition of the worth in every individual, regardless of outward appearances. As the scene draws to a close, the restaurant slowly returns to its normal rhythm, but the mood has irrevocably changed. The conversations that follow are quieter, more considerate, as if everyone has been marked by the experience of seeing someone rise above judgment with grace, dignity, and strength. In the background, the waitress is slowly making her way back to her station, still visibly shaken but now more determined than ever. She begins to interact with the other customers in a quieter, more respectful manner, taking her time to ensure she offers the best service she can. It's clear that she's processing the lessons from the day, knowing she has a long road ahead to regain the trust of her colleagues and patrons, but she's determined to be better. The final shots linger on the faces of the patrons, who now seem more thoughtful, more aware of the impact of their own judgments. The camera focuses on a few patrons, lingering on their expressions, some filled with remorse, others deep in contemplation, as the restaurant slowly finds its rhythm once more. The scene ends with the restaurant's door swinging open again, as a new set of patrons enters. They're greeted warmly, not just by the staff, but by the atmosphere that has changed in subtle but meaningful ways. And as the door closes behind them, the quiet hum of conversation resumes, but it's clear that something within the hearts of those inside has shifted. The message lingers, not just in the patrons' minds but in the air itself. Treat others with respect and kindness, because you never know the depth of a person's story or who they truly are. As Ethan walks out of the restaurant, the camera follows him down the street, his figure gradually becoming smaller as he moves away from the scene of tension and revelation. The soft hum of the city surrounds him, yet his composed presence continues to command attention. The streets, though bustling with activity, seem quieter in the wake of what has just transpired inside. As he reaches the corner, about to turn and disappear from view, he stops and turns slightly toward the camera, as if sensing the weight of the moment. The background noise of the city fades as his voice, calm and steady, fills the frame. Remember this, Ethan says, his eyes locking with the camera. Your worth isn't defined by what you wear, how much money you have, or where you come from. It's defined by how you treat others, by your character and your heart. People may judge you based on appearances, but don't let that stop you from being who you truly are. He pauses, allowing his words to sink in. The street is quieter now, as if the world itself is reflecting on the message he's just shared. He continues, his voice softer now but still powerful. Everyone has a story, everyone has a journey. And we all deserve respect, kindness, and understanding, no matter how we look on the outside. So, the next time you meet someone, don't judge them by what you see. Instead, look deeper. You might be surprised by what you find. With those final words, Ethan gives a small nod, then turns and walks away, disappearing into the crowd. The camera lingers on the empty street for a moment before cutting to black, leaving viewers with a lingering sense of introspection and a renewed commitment to empathy and understanding. Never judge a book by its cover. Kindness costs nothing, but it's worth everything. Have you ever been judged by your appearance? Share your story in the comments below. Let's continue this conversation. Have you ever been judged or underestimated based on your appearance? How did it make you feel? Or maybe you've experienced a moment where someone showed you kindness when you least expected it. Share your stories in the comments below. We'd love to hear how you've overcome judgment or how acts of kindness have made a difference in your life. Your story could inspire someone else who's going through something similar. Let's spread more kindness, empathy, and understanding. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if the story resonated with you. Together, we can make a difference.